Hello, everyone, and welcome in this podcast. First of all, I want to thank you for joining this conversation on the topic, the really important topic, which is the gap between corporate and startup when it comes to innovation. The today's session will be a sort of a fireside-style discussion, conversational, practical, and grounding with a real experience. We will try to move from posing the problem, finding the reasons why the collaboration so often fails, and most importantly, to what it actually takes to make it work. I'm really happy today to have Adèle Yaroulina and Laurent Kinet joining me, two voices who bring both strategic depth and field experience to this subject. And both of them have written about this organization situation, and both of them have a very interesting journey in the innovation world through startups, scale-ups, and joining corporate and supporting corporate with startups in their professional journey. They will explain that by themselves. Let's have the stage set. The real missed opportunity, it's definitely not that companies have lack of innovation initiatives, but there are too many still fail initiatives that turn collaborations into impact for them. At a time when the world is being reshaped by AI, energy transition, geopolitical shift, and climate pressure, there are a lot of organizations that can afford to innovate in isolation mode. So today, let's explore a simple but really critical questions. Why is collaboration so obviously necessary on one hand and still so difficult to make work in practice? So Adèle and Laurent would like to ask you the first questions. For you, what is the main problem with today's corporate innovation? Perhaps Laurent to start?
Yes, thank you, Yves. Indeed, innovation is as necessary as it is hard. And when it comes to corporate innovation, which is broader than the topic we discussed today, which is more corporate and startup collaboration. But obviously, the world is facing major challenges, energy transition, AI disruption, climate adaptation, and geopolitics, if not war. And the fact is that innovation is needed to overcome those challenges, but corporations are not that equipped to structure those innovation initiatives properly. Luckily, there are startups in front of them, so they could collaborate with startups to solve those issues, because the size of the task is so huge that they can't do everything alone. They need external help, aka startups. The fact is that they are two different animals. We like to say that having corporations collaborate with startups is like having gorillas dance with mice. It's a challenge. And why is it a challenge? And that's the main problem with today's corporate innovation, is that there is a structural asymmetry between startups and corporates. Startups are born to innovate. It's their primary mission. And corporates are built for stability. And innovation, disruption, and stability are two opposite words. Startups, they are free to innovate, but corporates are not free, but in charge of huge legacies, and they have to manage that. So it's a paradox. Corporates need innovation more than ever, but they are organizationally least equipped to absorb it. And that's, I think, the main problem. And the second, and I will finish here, is that, it's never a good moment to innovate. When everything goes fine, yes, it's fine. Why should we innovate? Everything is going well. But when you're under pressure, we don't have time to innovate. We have to focus on the problems. So there is always a good reason to defer innovation. And that's maybe the most important problem I see.
What about you, Adèle, about this structural problem, let's say?
Well, there are several problems actually that I would like to mention related to collaborative innovation with startups. And the first one would be the co-innovation gap. Research from sources such as PricewaterhouseCoopers Corporate Venturing Barometer consistently shows a gap between that intention and execution. While many large organizations they aim to collaborate with startups, far fewer succeed in doing so effectively. Why? Well, barriers such as complex procurement, legal and governance processes, and risk-averse management often get in the way. And unfortunately, good intentions alone are not enough. Co-innovation is an iterative process that requires commitment, patience, structure, and disciplined follow-through. Then I would like to mention the risk-averse corporate culture still. So large organizations optimize for efficiency and predictability, not experimentation. More often than not, corporate, and here I mean large organizations from the private and public sectors, so corporates focus on protecting the existing business and remaining safe instead of exploring new disruptive solutions. And failure is still very much seen as negative. Risky projects are often blocked by middle management, and innovation becomes innovation theater. So innovation breakfast, feverish hackathons without a clear purpose, but no real change. In the meantime, technology is transforming industries at an unprecedented speed. Tech companies such as Mistral AI, Stripe, Klarna, or Northvolt are not just raising massive funding rounds, they are rewriting the rules of entire industries. An organization must adapt or be left behind. According to me, the biggest risk today is not taking any risks. And more than ever, organizations must embrace agility and seize new opportunities. Then there is the bureaucracy that slows everything down. As companies scale, they create processes to avoid mistakes understandably. But over time, these processes become the main obstacle to innovation. For example, and not surprisingly, the approval cycles can be long, very long. Procurement processes can take months. Budget approvals for experiments can be a lengthy and an uncertain process. So this makes large organizations slow compared with agile startups whose speed becomes a competitive advantage. And here, shortly, I would like to share one real-world insight from my book, from a senior leader in global startup and acceleration, where the interviewee illustrated that reality. And here I read from that testimonial. Despite the technological fit and initial results, the partnership did not go through. Why? The problem wasn't the startup's capability. It was internal politics and cultural disconnect. The corporate was unable to match the speed of the startup. The startup operated with a fast execution-driven mindset, while the internal stakeholders on the corporate side navigated a far more complex and political environment. This is a testimonial that you can find in my book, which is interesting to illustrate what I have just mentioned. And then one last issue, one last problem that I would like to mention is when innovation is disconnected from the core business. So this is indeed another major issue when innovation teams are isolated. So companies often create innovation labs, incubators, accelerators, but these teams struggle to scale solutions because the core business simply does not adopt them, or because leadership support fades over time. So to conclude, I would like to say, corporations want startup results. They have good intentions, but they want startup results with corporate processes, and that doesn't work. And here, if I may, I don't want it to become too lengthy, but I would like still to end my answer with a part of, again, a real-world insight from Moritz Zimmermann, Innovation Officer at NATO and the founding Chief of Staff of Diana. Diana, which is Defense Innovation Accelerator for the North Atlantic. And I find NATO's way of approaching collaborative innovation with startups actually very impressive. And this is what Moritz shared with me. To ensure long-term military effectiveness, they need to cultivate a sustainable pipeline of startups and talent across the alliance, not only to meet today's operational needs, but to secure tomorrow's strategic capabilities. This imperative demands a fundamental rethinking of how defense institutions engage with the innovation economy. And here it's very interesting because he says moving beyond traditional models grounded in secrecy, rigid structures, and slow procurement cycles. And it calls for a willingness to step out of our comfort zone. Step out of our comfort zone and into open, fast-moving ecosystems, playing by market rules instead of expecting the market to adapt to ours. We can no longer afford to be mere observers, he says. If we want access to the best technologies and brightest minds, we must become credible, transparent, and active participants in the startup world.
Active participant.
Absolutely.
Great. So probably it will lead me to the open innovation concept. Would be very interesting if you and Laurent could spend a minute or two about this concept. Why is open innovation so important to solve the type of problems you just listed some minutes ago?
And here I would like to start with the title of my introduction, Think Ahead or Fall Behind. You know, in today's fast-moving business world that is shaped, challenged, I would say, by profound technological disruption, political crises, societal shifts, and economic uncertainty, innovation is, and I say it in my book, no longer a mere buzzword tossed around in meeting rooms as a fleeting spark of creativity. Not so long ago, many organizations believed that the key to successful innovation was to keep all innovative processes in-house. That was the era of closed innovation. Total control, no outsiders, fortress mentality. But fortresses, as history shows, do not always stand the test of time. With time, organizations uncovered one powerful truth. Innovation doesn't have to be a solo act. No matter how outstanding leaders or teams may be, sharing knowledge and resources often leads to better outcomes than working in isolation. Today, successful organizations amplify ideas by tapping into global networks of talent, of shared knowledge, of insight. And this is what we call, actually, open innovation, a strategy based on the idea that innovation thrives not in isolation but through collaboration. And by combining internal capabilities with external ideas, technologies, and expertise, organizations can accelerate growth, solve increasingly complex challenges, and, of course, create greater value.
On your side, Laurent, about
Yes, I concur. I even ask myself why we say open innovation, because for me, those two words are not synonyms, but they should not have, let's say, closed innovation, which is a paradox in terms. When you look at nature, the healthiest systems are porous. They connect with their ecosystem. They breathe. They exchange data, insights, and this is how they evolve. So open innovation is the activity of staying connected with your ecosystem, which is the only condition for evolution. And on top of that, you can't have, or no one has a crystal ball. Basically, you can't know the future. So what's important for corporations is to detect weak signals very early. And one way to do that is to collaborate with startups, because we can say that startups are, in some sort, crystal balls. You can see the future of your industry if you look at the startups playing in your field. So they act as early warning systems. They help the corporation to anticipate disruption, tectonic shocks coming their way. So open innovation is like having a strategic radar, creating strategic intelligence, faster implementation and optionality, basically. So open innovation is more than a tool or a trend. It's a matter of survival strategy because you need to let the external world come in and collaborate with them in order to keep your metabolism healthy and evolve like it. So this is why it's so important, because no one can live in isolation, as you said, Adèle.
Okay, cool. Now that we know why, how could we define open innovation?
Yeah, that's a good question, because we see a lot of confusion in terms, even from innovation professionals who are supposed to know that, but we confuse open innovation with open source, with innovation challenges versus startup programs, corporate venture capital, corporate venturing. All those terms create a kind of chaotic confusion. To me, open innovation has a much broader definition. It's what I call the corporate porosity. Ideas flowing in and out, so they flow both ways. Outside in, inside out, having talent, ideas, capital, culture flow both ways. And this works only if the organization has a kind of porosity. Startups must enter the building, and corporation must sometimes go outside their own premises. So open innovation is not a project or a sequence of initiatives or a sequence of projects. It's more like an operating model, an operating system, an OS made of processes, governance, tools, incentives, but also teams in place, budgets, everything that has enough organs and energy to survive. So the open innovation for me is the porosity, basically, if we want to summarize.
Open innovation porosity. Yes. What about Adèle on your side?
So I indeed agree with Laurent, because the boundary between open innovation and collaborative innovation is not always sharp. And both focus on working with others as a trigger for innovation. However, indeed, open innovation tends to take a more ecosystem-wide view, while collaborative innovation often involves more targeted, more structured partnerships. And here it's difficult to talk about open innovation without bringing Henry Chesbrough within the conversation. Henry Chesbrough, who is a professor and faculty director of the Garwood Center for Corporate Innovation at the Haas Business School of Business at the University of California in Berkeley. He's the father of open innovation, and he was actually the first one to introduce the term open innovation in 2003. And I would like to mention a very interesting sentence from Henry Chesbrough that he recently confirmed in one of our recent written exchanges. And he confirmed that businesses that open up their innovation processes consistently bring products to market faster and with a higher likelihood of success than those relying solely on in-house research and development. So yes, how do we define open innovation? As already mentioned, open innovation, I would say indeed, is a strategy based on the idea that innovation thrives, not in isolation, but through collaboration.
Collaboration. The world is on the table, but seems doesn't succeed a lot for the moment. If I look at some studies, just made some investigation before we talk today, over 78% of IT executives from the Global 2000 companies report that less than half of their POCs, proof of concepts, result in production deployments. Another study shows that only 15% of partnership between healthcare corporates and startups are successful, meaning that 85% fail to meet the expectations. A third study shows that 60% of the POCs run longer than 3 months, contributing to higher failure rates. So, Laurent, what is your perspective on that? How do you see that?
Yeah, it's, let's say, easy to pinpoint the misalignment with the strategy of the corporate. So if there is no link with the corporate strategy, initiatives will stay in the innovation theater zone. But that's obvious. We have seen with our bare eyes large corporations launching corporate accelerators just because the competitor next door was doing so. Or when there is no link, it's just activity, but it's not strategy. And this, of course, can only but fail. But what's more interesting, I think, in the very reasons why corporate startup collaborations fail is, of course, the cultural misalignment. As we said at the beginning, these are two very different animals. So there is a cultural misalignment and misaligned expectations. And now we see that the tables have turned. Until recently, corporates were at the center of the universe, and you had startups orbiting around them, hoping for approval and applying to challenges, etc. But now we see that the tables are slowly turning. The best startups are over-solicited. So if the corporations don't have something very substantial to offer, clear commitments, real contracts, fast approval tracks, then they will step out of the game because they have something better to do. Startups, by definition, have a very little bandwidth. So they have to choose their battles and decide who to devote their time to. So this is, to me, the most prominent reasons why those collaborations fail, because it's not managed like a real operating model. Between corporates and startups, the collaboration is not natural because they are not the same kind of entities. So it must be designed deliberately to make it work. It's not just like this. So you need a real operating model treated as a process rather than a sequence of events with a scouting pipeline, evaluation frameworks, clear decision points, internal sponsors, a real ecosystem around that. Because they are not wired the same way. Startups have a very different relationship to time. Like Adèle said earlier, when procurement cycles are longer than the standard AI models succeeding one after the other, then it will never work. So a very different relationship to time, to risk, and then to speed. So it's just like experimentation hitting the wall of risk management. And sometimes it can't work like this. So it must be designed to work, and not just hoping that it will because of the good willingness of each stakeholder. No, it must be more than that.
Okay. Adèle, something to add on that?
Yes, I would like to add that collaborative innovation has huge potential, yet it is complex and can become painfully difficult. It can become extremely painful to navigate. And thank you for sharing the numbers, because they indicate indeed that still too large percentage of corporates and startups are dissatisfied or somewhat dissatisfied with their collaborations. And at first, it is an unnatural act. How can stakeholders such as startups and large organizations, so inherently different in terms of people, processes, and cultures, connect and build something together? Yet this is exactly, according to me, the most exciting part. That collision of mindsets and ways of thinking and operating is the spark needed to make innovation happen. Both sides possess what the other does not. Startups bring, among other things, agility, speed, so this ability to navigate uncertainty and fresh perspectives. Corporates, on the other hand, bring resources, scale, and deep expertise. And where these two worlds meet, the spark happens. And that spark is collaboration. That spark is value creation. And without that spark, without that collision and that discomfort, there is no value. There is no co-innovation.
Okay, thank you. You both have taken a lot of time in making some concrete work on that under the form of books. Can we have a sort of introduction of each of your production?
Yes, indeed. I have written a book called Corporate Venturing, a Framework, which is subtitled as 100 Ways Startups Can Transform Your Organization. And the subtitle is very important because having and still working with dozens of corporations around the globe, the first thing that struck me is that practitioners don't have a vision wide enough on the potential and opportunities. They are not aware of all the benefits they can expect from collaboration with startups. Of course, you have the obvious ones: create a new product, infuse a culture of innovation internally, blah blah blah. But actually, you can draw much more benefits than that. And the book first lists 100 ways startups can transform your organization. Of course, you have much more than 100, but it's a start. And at the same time, you have a lot of ways to engage with startups. When we discuss with innovation professionals within large organizations, they often mention the same 5 engagement models that I call the big 5: accelerators, venture clienting, hackathon, etc. But actually, there are much more ways to engage. And this book lists 50 ways of engagement, what I call engagement models. And the framework between those two is the cross-reference or the articulation between the model, the way to engage, and the benefit you can expect. Because if you want to get specific benefits from the collaboration with startups, maybe one model will be more efficient than another one. And based on experience and literature, we just cross-reference which model to use to follow that objective. And the framework helps corporate venturing teams, innovation teams, R&D teams, sometimes also business units, to structure the corporate venturing activity based on the objectives first, so the strategy first. And then we drill down to the model and then to the roadmap and the dashboard to make sure that you measure the right indicators to make sure that that the performance is there. And this is basically what the book is about, but we also run workshops around it and things like that.
Adèle, on your side, you just launched your book some days ago, let's say?
Yes, indeed. Indeed, quite recently. My book is Collaborate to Innovate: How Startups and Established Organizations Create Breakthrough Success Together. And it is a practical, no-nonsense guide for established organizations seeking to innovate faster through startup collaboration. Last October, I started conducting interviews for the book. I conducted nearly 100 in-depth conversations, one-on-one conversations with innovation, open innovation, and startup leaders across Europe and beyond, because I wanted the book to be grounded in real, practical human experience. So there is no academic jargon, no lengthy theories. It is a hands-on compass for organizations navigating the complexities of startup corporate collaborations. And at the heart of the book sits the Co-Innovation Builder, the CIB. Not as a rigid framework, but as a guide for asking the right questions, including the uncomfortable ones. The Co-Innovation Builder is a diagnostic tool for existing collaborations. It can be used as a blueprint for new partnerships. It is also a communication trigger that makes space for honest and sometimes difficult conversations. And last but not least, it is a time saver that prevents misalignment and wasted effort. Because collaborations, as we said it, are rarely smooth. They can be complex. And my tool, the Co-Innovation Builder, creates a safe, structured space to raise these issues early on, before they derail the partnership. And since its creation, the CIB has been tested and been used also in co-innovation workshops with startups, corporates, public institutions, university teams, and many other stakeholders across Europe.
Okay, so we understand you've been spending a lot of time on it, in years, in experience, in a lot of expertise you have developed on that. You probably are extremely well positioned to explain how innovation can impact strategy or be part of the strategy. Can we go this subject with you, Laurent, perhaps?
Yeah, sure. It's the foundation of everything. Without strategy, everything is done in vain. So, innovation must create value. So it's not an activity per se, just for the sake of doing it. But it must create revenue, cost reduction, strategic advantage, whatever is linked to strategy. So if it's not linked to the corporate strategy, then it's wasted because it plugs in a value chain. And that's important, very important to understand, is that it must be tied to something substantial, not just a float in the air. And why that? Because innovation has expected benefits, and benefits must be measured, must contribute to corporate objectives. So another thing is that when you think in strategy, you engage in a kind of portfolio logic, so short-term, mid-term, long-term things. And when you collaborate with startups, you can look for short-term improvements or mid-term partnerships or long-term bets. And so the timing aspect of this in a portfolio is something that can help you drive this corporate strategy. Having a good strategy is a clarification tool because it tells you where to scout for startups, which technology matter, which startups to engage. So it's more than just a corporate requirement. It's also a tool when you use it right.
Okay. Adèle, on your side, on strategy?
I think strategy is essential. And before looking for external stakeholders, external innovation partners, such as high potential tech startups to accelerate your innovation effort, there is absolutely a necessity to align internally by setting up a reliable and flexible also innovation process. And the collaboration with startups should be based on the strategic relevance to your business. Co-innovation has to support the company's long-term goals. If it doesn't, these initiatives tend to become scattered experiments with little real impact. That's why organizations need to define clear priorities as well, based on their business needs worth solving. Some needs are, of course, more urgent, solving immediate operational or market challenges. Others are more what I call latent, so emerging opportunities that may become critical in the future. And the role of having a strategy is to balance both, ensuring innovation delivers value today, while already preparing the organization for tomorrow.
Okay. So strategy is clear. But Laurent, how to make it work?
The collaboration between corporates and startups.
Yeah.
We could answer this with a very, very, very long list of advice, but we don't have the time for that. And I very often refer to the golden triangle. So three main principles from which everything derives. First is that you have to not only understand, but set up the corporate porosity we were talking earlier. So making sure that anything can flow both ways to make the collaboration easier. So you have to put in place legal frameworks, procurement adaptations, having internal champions, etc. Second, you have to scout for startups because you can't collaborate if you don't identify the right startups to collaborate with. And you have to put this scouting effort as a process to ensure a continuous pipeline, even if you don't collaborate with most of them. But it's a process more than a project. And the third principle is making sure to work with the right tools. the right data sets and insights, the right AI, the right expertise, which is also a tool, and have them function together very well.
Okay, thank you. Adèle, how to make it work?
Well, successful partnerships, and I think I said it already, require a strong strategy, focus, and commitment from both sides, along with a clear win-win value proposition and the right tools. In my book, the first 2 chapters focus on the essential groundwork that needs to happen before even entering collaboration on both sides. And then at the core of the book, there is the co-innovation builder that also helps to make collaboration happen and succeed. It is, and I would like to repeat it, a hands-on tool that maps out and facilitates startup corporate collaboration. And the tool helps to identify the key elements for building a successful startup corporate collaboration. And I invite you to discover these elements within my book.
Okay, so we spent quite a lot of time so far about the corporates, let's say, but the other part of the equation is the startups. What would be your, not recommendation, but what is the, according to you, the perspective of the startup in this collaboration?
So here I would like to make it more like, the do's and don'ts for startups who listen to us, startup founders, co-founders who listen to us. It is important to assess your own readiness as a startup before entering a collaboration. So what are your business needs? What are your drivers, your main motivations behind the intention to collaborate? Do you have the right people? Can you commit resources? The collaboration with a corporate can be a lengthy, draining process. Is it something you can afford? What do you expect in return? What is the expected return on collaboration, so the ROC? Are you sure it is the right format for you, the right type of collaboration? It has to be a win-win. So make sure, as a startup, that the collaboration brings clear strategic value to you. Then evaluate the corporate's readiness, including their previous experience working with startups. How do they typically engage with startups? What types of collaboration do they usually commit to? Perform your due diligence. Then ask the right questions before the collaboration starts to understand expectations, timelines, and decision-making processes as well. Also, do not be overly paranoid when it comes to IP. I do have in mind a case where a corporate unfortunately copied a startup solution and attempted to reproduce it internally. This can happen, let's be realistic, and it's terrible. Yet fortunately, this is not the norm. In order to collaborate and build trust, you also need to share information. Be aware and careful, but do not let fear block collaboration. And finally, last but not least, do not put all of your eggs in one basket. Avoid relying on a single corporate partnership. So this would be my, let's say, 2 cents on how to make it work on the startup side.
Okay. Laurent?
Yeah, to make it work, I think there must be a mutual readiness. Startups must become enterprise ready, and enterprises must become startup ready. And from the startup perspective, something that startups and scale-ups often don't understand quickly is that their technology is very important, but from the corporate perspective, it might not be the blocking factor. Because corporates have internal rules, policies, that will prevent them to work with a startup that is not compliant or enterprise ready enough. Because corporates will always prefer a less advanced technology from a more mature company than the other way around. If you are not ride to navigate into the corporate strings and oceans and things, it will never work. So Organizational maturity, product stability, IT compliance, security are as important as the product or technology itself. And it's sometimes disregarded. And this is why we have designed enterprise readiness level assessment tool, helping startups and scale-ups to self-assess where they are in terms of enterprise readiness, based on 72 criteria organized in 7 or 8 categories, including also soft criteria like responsiveness, for instance. And they can self-assess themselves, and they receive a score between 0 to 200. And it creates automatically the roadmap for them to improve and to go up on that scale. And it's also a tool that is used by corporations themselves to evaluate the startups that are scouted. So ERL, enterprise readiness level, is very important, and it can be or can become a new standard like the TRL is.
Okay, so perhaps last word in conclusion from both of you about, should we rename open innovation into collaborative innovation? What do you think about that, Laurent?
I think that this is wording, and what's more important than words is the operation. What's important is not renaming, but operationalizing it with frameworks, with scouting systems, with collaboration models. Words will follow. What's important is what's in a name, not the name itself. So I think open innovation is good, even if it's a bit redundant, because innovation should always be open somehow.
Adèle, do you align on that?
Well, I'm not sure about the fact, if we should rename open collaboration in collaborative innovation. Indeed, this is just a matter of terms. And also, these are still two distinct approaches. We said it, and Laurent said it as well. Open innovation tends to take a more broad ecosystem-wide view, while collaborative innovation involves more structured partnerships. However, what I do believe is that one form of collaboration stands out above all others, and this is collaborative innovation with startups. Because in today's world, with all the disruptions, all the uncertainties that we currently have in our world, every forward-looking organization should be paying close attention to startups. Why? Because startups are the engines of disruption. They are simply ground zero for emerging technologies, for disruptive business models, creative thinking, and agility. They move quickly, they dare to take risks, and operate without the weight of bureaucracy. They operate being unburdened by bureaucracy. And for established organizations, collaborating with startups is an essential strategy to stay relevant and not only stay competitive, but stay ahead of the competition. So instead of viewing startups as a threat or as free consultancy, they should be seen by large organizations as potential partners. This would be my end word.
Okay, thank you. So except by reading your book, is there a way or another to be helped by what you do, each of you? Or
yes, we of course at Novable have first a technology. So we have a startup intelligence platform which helps you to run global scouting campaigns using AI and expert validation. So we deliver curated shortlists for any kind of use cases, but especially when it comes to startup collaboration, when you have to work on something with a startup that could be plugged into your innovation value chain or industrial processes or transformation programs. But we have more than technology. We also set up frameworks and give strategic advice. So we run corporate venturing framework workshops, but we also deliver strategic advisory that we can do with Adèle and partners. And as you said, we also write a lot. We have some publications, books, but also we give keynotes to management teams.
Okay. Adèle, are you really open to support our audience?
Yes, absolutely. And I would like to invite our audience to visit my website, where you can discover different ways of working together. And this is www.adele.yaroulina.com.
So probably the next step would be to discuss a bit further about how innovation can scale within the corporations. But I think for today we will have enough.
Yeah. Thank you, Yves.
Thank you so much,
both
both.
of you. Yeah.
Thank you, Adèle.